And as we continue with a week of mourning and state burial for the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan here in Accra, let's cross over to Germany to find out how he is being remembered there. And we're doing this in our usual crossover now. Jefferson Chase is political correspondent with our partners, the DW. He's standing by for us. Jefferson, it's good to have you here in Ghana. It's been a very solemn week for us. What do you say is what people knew about Mr. Kofi Annan and the impact that he had on humanity based on the work that he did at the United Nations?
Well, Gifty, I mean, he was a very important figure, not only in Africa or in Ghana, but also really around the world, and that, of course, includes Germany. The former German president, Horst Köhler, whose tenure overlapped with Kofi Annan's quite a bit, is going to be attending the official state funeral services in Ghana. And beyond that, he was a very well-known and very well-liked and well-respected public figure among the general populace here. If you asked an ordinary German what he thought about Boutros Ghali, Kofi Annan's predecessor, most people I don't think would know who you were talking about, but everybody knew Kofi Annan. Shortly after he died, German Chancellor Angela Merkel singled out his charisma and his ability to inspire people, particularly young people around the world, as one of his most important features. And I think that speaks volumes about why the entire world is mourning Kofi Annan this week.
Right. So I'm wondering how his death was reported, because even though he comes from here in Ghana, he wasn't living in Ghana at the time that he died. He died in Switzerland. How was his death reported in German media and in other media across Europe?
Well, it was certainly the top story last month when the news broke that he had died in Switzerland. I think Germans in particular had a very strong affinity with Kofi Annan because Annan was known as someone who preferred talking of going to a negotiating table rather than trying to solve problems with military interventions. That's a very German way of thinking about how to deal with the world. Annan once said, if you have a problem and you don't find a solution, you go back to the negotiating table tomorrow. That's a very German way of looking at things, if you will. And then, of course, both Germany and Kofi Annan were very firm believers in multilateralism. Both Annan and all of the German governments in the past years have been, while being great friends of the United States, have not been keen on the U.S. going it alone. So I think for that reason, he was a very well-respected and liked figure here, and that's why his death got a lot of coverage when it happened last month.
And certainly there's a lot that people can learn, especially diplomats, world leaders can learn from his character, just like you put it, Jefferson. But for journalists like yourself, who cover the problems, the sort of problems that Mr. Annan worked very hard at the UN to deal with, what do you say his legacies are, and how can we make those legacies count?
Well, I mean, certainly one of his major legacies was just alerting, getting the world to pay attention to Africa. You think of the millennial goals. Not all of them are going to be reached, but he certainly raised awareness of it. And I think it's incumbent upon us journalists not to lose sight of that goals. He also said once, he said, ignorance and prejudice are the handmaidens of hypocrisy, of propaganda. I think that's a fantastic way to put what journalists should be doing. We should be trying to provide people with information. We should be trying to combat bias and prejudice in order to make the world a better place. I mean, I think his legacy to us, or his challenge to us, if you will, is to keep our eyes on the goals that we all share, all human beings on this planet, to understand the overarching problems that affect everyone, but never to lose sight of the individual human challenges, the suffering that many people in many parts of the world go through. I think that's something, that I could write down on a piece of paper and pin it up next to my desk, because I think it's a fantastic a lesson and bit of guidance for all of us journalists.
Certainly it is. And my final question, Jefferson, will be that here in Ghana, people say that we've lost a gem. We've lost somebody that a lot of the young people here looked up to on the international or on the world stage. I'm wondering, and I don't know if you've engaged a couple of Germans about this, what do they think the world has lost?
Well, I would say the simplest way of putting it, they think the world has lost one of the major world statesmen of the late 19th, 20th century. He was a voice of reason. I think that becomes particularly poignant to a lot of Germans now because, of course, as is the case in many other European countries, there's a lot of irrationalism. There's a lot of aggression and hatred that's manifesting itself around the country. If you think about the debates surrounding refugees and the far right, so I think his legacy for Germans in particular is as a voice of rationalism who tried to get people to sit down at tables and talk about solutions to problems instead of using violence or becoming aggressive to one another.
I couldn't put it any better than that. Jefferson Chase is a political correspondent with our partners DW, joining us all the way from Berlin in Germany. Jefferson, thank you so much for joining us. So it is still a week that we're mourning the former UN Secretary General. Today, we do know that his body is being filed past at the Accra International Conference Center. Tomorrow is the funeral, and we'll be here to bring you all of the details. You're still watching The Pulse with me, Gifty, and Dwapia.